Do you enjoy pain?
Why do I do this to myself?
Do you hate yourself?
Oh my f***ing god.
Do you have no self-respect? Then I've got the game for you. Like yourself, I also lack sense of self-worth and decided to spend 100 hours of my life playing Lies of P. Now, this game absolutely beat my ass, but I loved it, so today I want to answer the question, how good is Lies of P 100 hours later? Souls-likes are known for their grim and depressing environments, this game being no exception. Lies of P exists in a beautiful yet simultaneously depressing and morbid world, but we're no strangers to this. You find yourself as an unknown puppet starring Timothée Chalamet in the aftermath of a massacre when, apparently, in a town where puppets were used as helpful companions and tools towards the progression of society, suddenly developed an out-of-control anger and violence towards the very same people they were supposed to serve. As you progress through different areas of the game, you see the result of this. Areas that were obviously once full of life are now full of corpses or enemies that were the perpetrators of the catastrophe that had occurred. What I love about this game is the art team's ability to take a nice and popular story known for being child-friendly and twisting it into a deeply violent and yet philosophical journey, which, if you pay enough attention to your surroundings, is clearly displayed through its art style. The best way I can describe it is that, at times, it feels like you're stepping into a painting, a carefully thought out, detailed, and patiently crafted painting. But you know what else is interesting? The story. You wake up in what feels like just after the events of a horror scene, almost as if you missed it by 5 minutes. You then move through the town of Krat while following the guidance of the exact same individual that woke you up from your inanimate puppet slumber. The more ground you cover throughout the game, the more survivors you meet, the more documents you uncover, the more landmarks you find, which all contribute to one important thing: figuring out what happened, why it happened, and who did it. Although this game can be cryptic like Dark Souls at times, I appreciate the fact that the NPCs and key characters in the game don't speak in riddle. I honestly believe that that's one of the key advantages that Lies of P has over Dark Souls. I like the simplicity of Lies of P, while with Dark Souls it feels as if I have to do literature analysis when all I want to do is answer the question,
what the fuck is going on in here on this day?
I especially love the documents you come to find throughout the game because of how much hidden context and plot it uncovers when we're dealing with specific characters' backgrounds. It all adds up to the world building. But do you know what else does these too? Quests. They were great. I feel guilty for comparing, but at the end of the day, you can't help but do so. Lies of P developed easy-to-follow quests with clear guidance, which I can only suspect it is because they wanted you to actually understand, or at least find out more about this world, the people within it, and their past history. Some of these stories were heartbreaking, some of them were heartwarming, and even though this game's dialogue options are limited, they really put your ethics and morals into perspective if that's how you're willing to play the game. How so? Well, at times you're put into dialogue situations in which you either have to tell an ugly truth or a beautiful lie. Obviously, one of this is a beneficial decision, and the other one, not as much. However, every decision comes at a cost, which is part of the moral of the story. However, it doesn't necessarily have a really big outcome and impact on your ending of the game. The game is basically the baby between Dark Souls combat, Bloodborne's environment, and Sekiro's parrying mechanics. This game ran incredibly smoothly. I had no issues on PC, and for the majority of my experience, I actually don't have many complaints. But the ones that I do, I feel quite strongly about, but I'll explain those later. It's no secret that Lies of P borrows heavily from its predecessors in this genre, but that's expected. What is truly impressive is that it actually managed to borrow inspiration from other really successful titles and incorporate them successfully into one functioning and enjoyable game. One point I do have to mention were the collectibles. There are so many collectibles in this game. Everywhere you go, all the mobs you kill, this game hands out collectibles as much as Oprah. It's a tiny complaint, but it can get a bit much at times, and if you know your way around this game, it just ends up making the game slightly easier, which kinda goes against what it's supposed to be. The combat worked incredibly well. It's challenging at times as expected, but it feels fair for the majority of the time. Most of my issues with combat tend to relate to boss fights, but not all of them. I'll give you more context in a bit. What I believe made it interesting and different from what we've seen before was the incorporation of a variety of Legion arms with different skills, a lot of weapon variety, but most importantly, the ability to mix and match weapon blades and handles. On enemies, there is some variety, but not really enough of it. As you move further into new zones, you start seeing reskinned versions of the same enemies you have encountered before, with maybe a few tweaks like the type of environmental damage that affects them in particular areas of the world, which is cool. It's a nice detail in a tiny plot device that adds up to the consistency of the story and world. However, you would almost wish that the further along you are in the game, that some of the mobs would be different due to developments in the story, or even mutations over time due to the exposure to what created this whole predicament we find ourselves in in the first place. But going back to weapon variety, I think this is a big contributor to what made this game stand out. The idea they came up with being able to mix and match blades and handles without requiring you to use crafting items allows you so much freedom to experiment and not punish you for crafting a combination that you actually don't like. As a result, I ended up leveling several different blades and kept revisiting Eugenie, the crafting NPC, so that I could change my weapon according to the current bosses or mobs in a specific area that I was going through. This is a really important flaw that I believe crafting systems have in some games. The threat of loss of ingredients when crafting an item you're not sure whether or not you're going to enjoy after doing so. I think that could be either the solution already presented by Neowiz in round 8 in this game, or even just allowing the player to enter a simulated area where they can test out an item before making the choice to craft it or not. But you know what's more important than crafting? I had a love-hate relationship with boss fights in this game, and it's probably what I want to talk about the most. For the first entire half of the game, boss fights felt like this.
Yes! Hell yeah! Hey, come on, baby! Come on!
The second half of the game, they felt more like this. It felt as if, after a certain point, the difficulty spike just went through the roof. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate a difficult boss. What I feel like was done wrong here is that some of these bosses were not only difficult, but frustrating. Frustrating because they were given really delayed and difficult to time movesets, really fast and almost impossible to avoid continuous strikes, moves that had such similar animations that they were difficult to tell apart from each other, or even all of these at the same time. Added on to that, there are 13 main bosses and almost half of them had second phases. Going back to comparing Lies of P with Dark Souls, in the Souls series, bosses with second phases were sprinkled throughout the game. They are rare and usually saved to the very significant bosses to the lore. And although many of the bosses we fight in Lies of P are important characters in the story, you have to make a better choice of which ones are deserving of a second phase. This is especially frustrating the last hours of the game where 3 bosses are like 20 minutes apart from each other and all have second phases. It honestly felt like jumping from one frustrating situation to another. On a positive note, they are memorable, they look incredible and are fun for the most part. Also, when you die in a boss fight, at least your ergo is left outside of the boss room. I thought that was a nice touch, especially considering how difficult some of these bosses were. Oh, and since this game is purely offline, you don't really have summons, but you do get to use a currency called Star Fragments to summon a Spectre to help you with any bosses. Now, I don't have much to say on the upgrading systems besides acknowledging that they exist. I'm not a fan of systems to upgrade your character, but I understand that some people are. To put it simply, I just don't like to waste much time doing other things that to me don't really classify as playing the game. That's just my personal taste. There are a few separate systems in place, some for your weapons, some for your overall character, healing, weapon arts, etc. They're not overly complicated, I just don't enjoy spending too much time on these. But we can't talk about Souls-likes without mentioning New Game Plus. When you opt to do New Game Plus, you get to keep everything except collectibles. You can respec as soon as you get to the equivalent of Firelink Shrine, Hotel Krat. Enemies and bosses hit harder, the hotel stores are completely reset, meaning that you have to find the store upgrades again, and new phases are unlocked in New Game Plus and New Game Plus 2. On another note, I was quite surprised by the quality of the voice acting. Some of these actors really nailed it out of the park. I don't want to spoil anything, but there are certain parts of the game where the emotions are really well portrayed. But you know what else is surprising? The music. It was honestly so good. Just have a listen at how the game greets you with its main menu. I could sit and listen to this for hours. When it comes to developing studios from Asia, a common strong suit of theirs is their music and overall art. They have a talent for beauty and it shows. The music is quite fitting for the majority of the areas, ranging from really relaxing and quiet to over the top and dramatic. Overall, this is a great game, one that I hope to revisit for years to come. Right now, I need a break from it though. I'd score it a strong 8.5 out of 10, purely on the fact that the game has such an unreasonable difficult spike halfway through it, and also, not every other boss needs a second phase.